It never unfolded in a single dramatic moment. She did not wake up one morning and suddenly decide that her feelings for you were gone. From your point of view, it might have felt abrupt, like a storm rolling in on a day that had started perfectly clear. But the truth behind it was far more subtle, almost silent. You may feel as if you overlooked some giant warning sign, something obvious that should have caught your attention. Yet what truly happened was much quieter. You simply didn't notice the slow movement taking place beneath the surface. At the start, everything between you felt effortless. Being with her felt like having your favorite song playing softly in the background of your life, comforting, familiar, and always pleasant. Conversations flowed naturally, without effort or strain, and your days seemed to fall into an easy rhythm together. When she replied to your messages, her words carried warmth. There was feeling in them. You never had to stop and question whether she cared about you, because the answer felt obvious. It existed the way sunrise exists, reliable, expected, and comforting. Back then, you weren't anxious. You weren't analyzing every detail or trying to decode hidden meanings behind her words. There was no puzzle to solve, no tension pressing on your thoughts. You were simply yourself, relaxed and open, appreciating her for exactly who she was. That is why the shift, when it began, felt so strange and confusing. It didn't arrive with noise or drama. Instead, it crept in quietly, altering the feeling in the air so gently that it was difficult to notice at first. What made it even more confusing was that nothing dramatic seemed to happen on the surface. There was no explosive argument filled with shouting, no slammed doors, no harsh words that you could replay in your memory. You didn't make some massive mistake that haunted you afterward. There wasn't a single, clear moment where everything broke apart. No point in time you could circle and say, "That's when it ended." And yet, somewhere deep inside, you sensed something had changed. It was subtle, almost too small to name, but strong enough that you couldn't ignore it. Her messages began arriving a little later than before. Not hours later, not long enough to raise alarms immediately, but just slow enough to create a tiny pause where there used to be steady flow. It was like a small gap appearing in a smooth stream. Her tone shifted too. Where her words once carried energy and emotion, they now felt simpler, flatter. She remained polite. She still responded. She was still present. But something delicate and bright seemed to be fading, as if a once vivid color had begun losing its intensity. This is where confusion often begins for many men. Your attention turns toward what you can measure and observe. You stare at the clock on your phone as minutes pass without a reply. You notice her messages becoming shorter, less detailed. You feel a faint sense that she's drifting just slightly farther away, and your thoughts start racing to explain it. Questions appear in your mind. Is she losing interest? Is she too busy? Has something else or someone else captured her attention? But what you are observing is not the beginning of the change. It is the visible result of something that began quietly inside her emotions much earlier. The real shift didn't start with delayed messages or shorter replies. It started within her, in ways that are far less obvious than most people imagine. She hasn't changed in the dramatic way you might expect. Instead, she has begun observing you. Often without conscious intention, she starts noticing your behavior more closely. She isn't doing this to manipulate you or create problems. She isn't planning elaborate tricks or asking you difficult questions. Rather, she makes tiny adjustments to her behavior, small changes, almost invisible ones. These changes create just enough uncertainty to reveal how you respond. When everything feels safe and predictable, people usually behave in familiar ways. But when uncertainty enters, even slightly, that's when real patterns begin to show. Uncertainty works like a light in a dark room. It reveals shapes and habits that were always there but previously hidden. Most men focus entirely on what she is doing, rather than asking themselves why she might be doing it. When her behavior begins to shift, your mind naturally searches for ways to restore balance. You want to bring things back to the way they once were, when everything felt comfortable and secure. Because of that desire, you begin changing your own behavior. You respond to her messages faster than ever before. You become more attentive, more accommodating. You try harder to be thoughtful, kind, and engaging. You invest more energy into keeping the connection alive. From your perspective, this feels logical. If something appears to be slipping away, you instinctively reach out to hold on to it. That seems responsible, caring, even necessary. But beneath the surface, something deeper is happening. Your actions are no longer coming from a place of calm enjoyment. Instead, they are being driven by fear. Fear that you might lose her. Fear that the connection might fade. She senses this shift. She may not analyze it consciously or write it down in a list, but she feels it. Human beings often understand emotional changes without needing words. We recognize patterns. We feel the difference in how someone shows up. In those small moments when she pulls back slightly and you lean in more intensely, you are revealing something important. You are showing her how you behave when certainty disappears. You are showing her whether you remain steady on your own or begin losing balance when the ground shifts. What matters most is that you likely don't even realize you're doing it. To you, it feels like loyalty, effort, and care. You believe you are protecting the connection, but from her perspective, it can feel like the balance between you has changed. By the time you begin sensing that something feels off, this process has already been unfolding for a while. It happened through countless small, nearly invisible moments that slowly reshaped how she saw you. That is why it feels sudden in hindsight. You never noticed the quiet beginning. You only felt the eventual outcome. It is very important to understand that these moments are not games. Many people describe them as tests, as if they are deliberate traps meant to cause harm. But that is not the reality. These shifts are not calculated tricks. They are natural responses that happen quietly and automatically. Deep down, her mind is trying to understand something about you. She cannot rely entirely on direct questions, because spoken answers are easy to give but difficult to prove. If she were to ask, "Are you confident?" or "Can you handle uncertainty?" most people would answer yes without hesitation. But behavior tells the real story. Actions reveal truths that words sometimes hide. So instead of asking directly, she observes. She notices how you behave when the emotional atmosphere changes slightly. This is where misunderstandings often happen. You believe something is wrong when in reality something is simply being revealed. You focus on what is happening on the surface rather than understanding the deeper purpose behind it. When a relationship feels completely predictable, there is no tension. Without tension, there is no opportunity to see how someone reacts under pressure. So the rhythm shifts slightly, not enough to break the bond, but enough to introduce uncertainty. Within that uncertainty, your natural habits emerge. Do you remain calm when answers are unclear? Or do you try to seize control? Do you stay grounded when her mood changes? Or do you shift your behavior to match hers? These are the silent questions she is answering within herself. When she takes longer to respond and you reply instantly, she feels the pressure building. When she becomes quieter and you grow more intense, she notices the imbalance forming. True steadiness has its own rhythm. It does not rush, it does not chase, it does not panic in the face of silence. This is where the quiet transformation takes place. When you react to every small change, it signals that your emotional state depends heavily on her. That can make her feel responsible for maintaining your stability, and over time, that responsibility can weaken attraction. This does not mean you should become distant, cold, or uncaring. That is another misunderstanding that often arises. The goal is not to withdraw or act indifferent. The goal is consistency. You want your level of interest to remain steady, regardless of temporary shifts. She is not looking for perfection. She is looking for your center. She wants to know whether your identity comes from within or whether it shifts depending on her behavior. Once she senses that your mood rises and falls based entirely on hers, her perception of you begins to change. The shift is gradual, not sudden, more like the fading of daylight into evening rather than the flipping of a switch. Over time, emotional distance grows. Safety in a relationship is not just about kindness. It is about reliability, the sense that someone remains calm and grounded even when circumstances change. When calmness disappears, she notices it immediately. That emotional signal is often stronger than any reassuring words you might offer. If you slow down and observe carefully, you will see that her actions are not random. They follow patterns. At the beginning, everything feels smooth and balanced. Energy flows equally between you. Conversation feels natural, almost effortless. You assume this harmony will continue indefinitely. Then the first pattern appears: space. She begins creating a small amount of distance. Her messages still come, but the spark feels softer. Many men interpret this as fading interest. In reality, it often means she has moved from simply enjoying the connection to observing it more closely. She is watching to see whether you remain steady or begin to wobble. The 3 patterns to watch. The second pattern emerges through inconsistency. At times, she becomes warm again, playful, affectionate, and engaged. In those moments, everything feels restored, as though nothing ever changed. Then, unexpectedly, she pulls back again. This pattern feels confusing, even frustrating. It creates the impression of mixed signals. But emotionally, this contrast serves a purpose. It highlights dependency. If your happiness rises when she is close and falls when she withdraws, it reveals that your emotional stability depends on her presence. She senses this rhythm, even if she never names it. Then comes the third pattern: silence. This does not necessarily mean disappearing entirely. Instead, it appears as reduced effort, fewer messages, less enthusiasm. This is often when tension feels strongest. Silence creates uncertainty. Without clear feedback, your mind searches for direction. Within that quiet space, your natural reactions surface. Do you remain calm, trusting the connection? Or do you feel compelled to act immediately? This is where many men struggle. Instead of observing the pattern, they react to discomfort. They send additional messages. They start conversations without purpose. They ask whether everything is okay. By doing so, they reveal unease with uncertainty. But these moments are not meant for action. They are meant for observation. Silence reveals the strength of your foundation. It shows whether you can remain at peace even when clarity is absent. By the time you feel an overwhelming urge to fix something, she has already noticed your reaction. That reaction becomes the lens through which she begins viewing you. It is no longer about what you say next. It is about what you showed when clarity disappeared. Changing your mindset. Many men misunderstand not her behavior, but its meaning. They interpret distance as rejection. They believe the connection is slipping away and rush to rescue it. But distance is not always a negative sign. Often, it represents a pause, a moment of reflection where emotions settle and become clearer. In that space, your behavior matters more than hers. If you chase her attention, she feels pushed. If you over-explain yourself, she senses imbalance. If you repeatedly seek reassurance, she feels your uncertainty. These actions communicate something deeper than words. They reveal that your emotional state depends on her reactions. And when that dependency becomes visible, attraction shifts. True attraction is rooted in emotional stability, the feeling that a connection rests on solid ground. When you remain steady, even while she moves through different moods, it creates a quiet sense of peace. This steadiness doesn't need explanation. It is felt. But when you mirror her uncertainty, becoming anxious when she becomes distant, it introduces tension beneath the surface. This is why shifting your mindset matters. Many men believe uncertainty requires greater effort, more communication, more gestures, more attempts to fix things. Yet often, the wiser response is to do less, but do it with clarity. Maintain presence without forcing it. Show interest without losing yourself in the process. Continue your direction in life without becoming consumed by momentary changes. She is sensing whether you can remain emotionally independent. Can you stay connected without needing constant reassurance? Can you allow space to exist without rushing to fill it? These silent questions shape her feelings. When you stop trying to control outcomes, the atmosphere begins to change. Control feels heavy, calm feels light, and calm is often interpreted as strength, not loud strength, but steady strength, the final understanding. By the time many people recognize what has been happening, it can feel too late to shift direction. This is not because the connection lacked sincerity, but because her perception has already been reshaped over time. It didn't happen through one dramatic mistake. It happened through many small reactions during moments of uncertainty. You searched for a single turning point, but the truth lies in countless tiny moments. Moments when you were being observed not for your words, but for your emotional reactions. Eventually, clarity begins to form. You realize it was never about saying perfect things or crafting flawless messages. It was about how you stood during silence, how you handled waiting, how you responded to uncertainty. You had focused entirely on her behavior, rather than understanding the deeper reasons behind it. Once you begin understanding the why, the patterns make sense. Her distance was not random, it was her way of gaining clarity. Her inconsistency was not chaos, it revealed your stability. Her silence was observation. During those times, she was not making logical calculations. She was feeling her way toward understanding. She was quietly asking herself, how does he behave when certainty disappears? Anyone can appear strong when life feels easy. True strength appears when circumstances become uncomfortable. The shift occurred in your reactions, in the way your emotional energy changed from relaxed presence to quiet worry. Once that impression settled into her perception, it became difficult to reverse. Attraction does not always respond to effort. It responds to consistency and emotional balance. This realization marks the beginning of a new path, not a path of regret, but one of clarity. It is not about fixing the past. It is about understanding it. When you truly see what happened, your behavior changes naturally. You stop chasing outcomes. You stop reacting to every shift. You begin focusing inward, on maintaining your center. You aim to become steady, regardless of circumstances, calm when things feel uncertain, balanced when emotions fluctuate. That steadiness was what she was quietly searching for all along. She was not measuring your words, she was sensing your emotional strength. When your inner foundation is solid, there are no tests to pass. In fact, you may not even notice them, because your behavior remains consistent, whether she is near or distant. That consistency creates lasting attraction. Not through control, but through calm energy that remains unchanged under pressure. So the next time something feels slightly off, resist the urge to fix it immediately. Avoid chasing answers too quickly. Instead, pause. Observe. When you understand what is unfolding beneath the surface, reactions fade and clarity takes their place. And once clarity arrives, your entire perspective begins to shift.